Dr. Andrea Harvey. Andrea Harvey has pre-recorded her presentation for us, so unfortunately she won't be able to join us in person today. But we have the recorded version of her talk. So Dr. Harvey is a CVS registered specialist in feline medicine and a European specialist in veterinary internal medicine. And Dr. Harvey has published widely as a veterinary specialist in companion animal internal medicine. She has moved into the field of equine welfare, studying the health and welfare of Australian brumbies or wild horses. And she is a research fellow in wild animal welfare at the Center for Compassionate Conservation in the University of Technology, Sydney. So we will be hearing Dr. Harvey's talk. And afterwards, I think we will go straight into the discussion portion of the workshop, since this talk is a bit shorter than the other talks. If no one is opposed to this, I think we can skip the break that we had planned and just go straight into the group discussion with the audience and panel members. If you would like to still have a break, just please indicate so in the chat. But I think we will skip the break after Dr. Harvey's presentation and go straight to discussion. So Gray, if you could play Dr. Harvey's presentation, and we welcome Dr. Harvey.
Hi, thanks for the invitation to join your workshop today, and I'm sorry that I couldn't make it live due to the time difference, but I'm just going to be talking for the next 20 minutes or so about the application of animal welfare assessment methodology using the case study of wild horses, which I've undertaken a lot of research. So what I'm talking about today is all from my PhD studies, which were not just looking at assessing the welfare of wild horses, but also the association of welfare status with other parameters of population and behavioural ecology. Today is really just a very brief overview of that work, but I'm also going to point you in the direction of a lot of other resources. So I specifically designed my thesis as a template for others that were wanting to assess welfare in wild species. So although I've used horses as an example, the methods follow a sort of a step-by-step protocol that's as applicable to other species as well. And my thesis is freely downloadable on the internet, so if you just Google the title and my name, the link should come up straight away. So for those of you that are interested in more information in applying welfare assessments to wild free roaming animals, I hope that will really help you to help act as a template for you. So just to give you a little bit of context about the fieldwork for my research and highlight some of the challenges that we face with wild animal welfare research. This is where I did all of my fieldwork over several years. So in Southeast Australia, in the Blue Mountains National Park, and also in the Australian Alps, which spans the southern end of New South Wales and the northern end of Victoria. So I had multiple research sites throughout those areas, and as you can see in the images, this comprised a lot of different habitats as well, from large open grasslands to alpine habitats to really mountainous woodland habitats as well. And so, you know, you'll be familiar with the challenges that this brings in how, you know, do we find these wild free roaming animals, but how do we evaluate them in as close a detail as we need to be able to evaluate them in order to determine. What I realised early on is that there was no precedence for how to assess welfare in wild free roaming animals. This hadn't been scientifically done before, and so the first stage of my research was to develop a conceptual framework for how we go about assessing welfare in wild free-roaming animals in a structured and scientifically robust way. So I developed this 10-stage protocol, and this is really sort of what I'm going to briefly talk through today and illustrate how I applied that to horses. This has been published in Animals, and so again, a lot more detailed information can be found in that publication that hopefully again acts as a step-by-step guide about how to apply this conceptual framework to other species as well. So I'm not going to talk too much on the first couple of stages, but really just to introduce that because they are very important. The first stage is acquiring an understanding of the principles of what we've termed conservation welfare. And this is really important because how welfare is perceived influences how it's assessed and the emphasis that's placed on different features. And different people do have different ways of characterizing what they think welfare is. And so for me, the way that I characterize welfare, which is in line with contemporary animal welfare science thinking, is that animal welfare is the individual animal's mental experiences. And this is really important because mental experiences are subjective. They can't be directly measured. But what we can do is measure physical and functional indicators and use validated links between those measurable indicators and the mental experiences that they're likely to reflect. So these may be negative mental experiences like thirst, hunger, thermal discomfort, anxiety, fear, pain, breathlessness, malaise, weakness, and so on, or positive mental experiences like being satiated, thermally comfortable, content, playful, maternally rewarded, and so on. So having a basic understanding of what we mean by welfare is really a critical start. The second stage of the protocol is acquiring knowledge and understanding of the 5 domains model. So my whole conceptual framework for assessing welfare is based around application of the 5 domains model for assessing welfare. And this structurally represents the understanding that physical and mental states are linked, and it facilitates the assessment of welfare based on this understanding. So what we do is measure physical indicators within these first 4 physical or functional domains of nutrition, the physical environment, health, and behavioral interactions, which includes behavioral interactions between animals, between the animals and their environment, and between the animals and people, if that's appropriate. And so what we do is then based on scientific evidence from a range of fields such as neuroscience, behavioral sciences, and cognitive ethology, we can use these indices to cautiously infer what mental experiences the animal may be having in this 5th domain of mental state. And it's that domain that represents the animal's overall welfare state. So the third stage of the protocol is acquiring species-specific knowledge relevant to each of those domains in the 5 domains model. So in other words, you need to really know your species inside out before we can even begin to think about assessing welfare. Welfare is very holistic, and often in ecological research we might be focusing on quite narrow areas like behavior or nutrition, but for welfare we need to incorporate all of those areas. So there's a lot of background knowledge that's required about the species. And we need that knowledge to be able to benchmark for the species what's good welfare, and what might they be showing in situations of poor welfare. We've got to be able to differentiate between those. And that can be challenging sometimes because there can be knowledge gaps, because what we want to know is what's usual for that animal or for that species under optimal conditions. But because welfare of wild animals hasn't really been assessed before, when we look at the ecological literature, we can't really relate a lot of parameters to welfare. And so we may have some knowledge of what is usual for that species, but that may not be representative of being under optimal conditions. So just take these horses here, for example. We can, look at the herd size of these horses, their reproductive rate, their survival. We can look at their home range, how the distance they move every day, but that's not necessarily going to represent what's usual for horses under optimal conditions, because clearly this very dry desert area is not an optimal environment for horses. So this is a review that I published on the foundational knowledge that's required for assessing horse welfare. And again, this very much acts as a template about the sort of information that you need to gather about your species of interest. So stage 4 is developing a comprehensive list of potential indicators that can be measured or observed in each physical domain, and distinguishing between welfare status and welfare alerting indicators. What I mean by that is welfare status indicators are those indicators where there's a direct proven link between what we can physically measure and the mental experiences that the animal's likely to be having. But there's other indices that we might be able to measure that may still be useful, but they may not actually be, that there may not be a direct link with what the animal is experiencing. They're indicators that might be more alerting to what might happen in the future rather than what is happening with the animal right now. Another way of looking at different measures is whether they're resource-based or animal-based. So resource-based measures are things like availability of food, water, other resources like shade, shelter, and so on and so forth. And so an example here in the difference between a welfare status and a welfare alerting indicator is if there's very poor food availability, we can't say the animals have poor welfare in the nutritional domain, but it's alerting us to the fact that they might. And we use an animal-based measure like the animal's body condition or food-seeking behavior to inform us of what the animal's experiencing at that point in time. So it's animal-based measures that are more accurately reflective of the animal's welfare. So as what an animal's experiencing is a very individual thing, and so what we really want to do when we're assessing welfare is to be able to identify individual animals and assess those individual animals. Now, obviously, for larger scale studies, we do need to think about, okay, how can we assess welfare in the whole population? And that's something that's a later step, and I'm not going to be able to talk about today. But the first step is to be able to identify what key welfare indicators you can assess in individual animals. And then there are ways that we can apply that to larger populations. So if we're looking at individual animals, obviously we've got to be able to identify them. In horses, it's generally pretty easy. You can identify them based on colour and facial and limb markings. But obviously in other species, that's not always so easy. So it may involve tagging or marking them in some way. With advances in artificial intelligence, there are technologies emerging that enable individuals to be identified based on imagery of different features that we can't easily see with the naked eye as well. So that's very. So the sixth stage is selecting methods for how we're going to measure these potential indicators, and what can be practically measured in the field. So it's important to start with a comprehensive list, because we've always got to be aware of the limitations in what we're assessing. So it's always, I think, important to have a comprehensive list of indicators that we would want to assess in an ideal world, and then we may have to narrow that down to what's practically accessible in the field. But we've got to take into consideration the limitations then of doing that. And that comes in later when we start thinking about assigning a confidence score for our overall welfare assessments. So, for example, for resource-based measures, this might just be geographical and meteorological data, measuring things like ambient temperature, weather conditions, rainfall, things like that, ground surveys to give us more information about the environment and things like food availability, water availability, shade, shelter, things like that. For animal-based measures, we might use direct observations in some species. We may use camera trap, still images and video. We might use drones. There may be other things that we can get information from, such as fecal samples. And sometimes we might have to capture animals and get direct information. But the methods I've listed here have focused on prioritizing non-invasive methods where possible, because that's going to reduce the welfare impacts of the actual research as well. So that's sort of more desirable as well. So in my research in horses, I did a lot of work with remote camera trapping using still images and also video images. So this is a publication that gives a lot more detail about the methodology for that, how I use the camera traps for detecting animal-based welfare indicators in individual horses, and what indicators could be detected easily and which couldn't. So that's sort of hopefully a really useful resource for people that want to use camera trapping to look at. So these are the indicators that I was able to look at, split between the first four physical or functional domains. So that table gives you an idea of the animal-based measures that I could get from either still images or from video, about nutritional status, the physical environment, environmental challenges, health status, and behavioral interactions as well. So these slides just give a few examples of the type of things that we could detect on camera traps, and also I go through a few direct observations as well. I guess that, you know, the images hopefully speak for themselves. We've got a nursing foal there, two foals playing, so those are clearly very positive sort of welfare indicators, as is the bottom image here that really captures that vitality of health in this stallion that's trotting along with his young colt. Whereas in the top right image there, you've got a horse that's in quite poor body condition. It's sort of walking quite slowly with his head lowered, and you can just appreciate the difference in the body posture between those different horses. So body posture was something that was really significant in evaluating in horses, and it probably is in a species. Here we've got some images taken from direct observation and some from camera traps, and you can see that they also really complement each other in the type of information we can get. The direct observations tend to be from a larger distance away, but it allows us to evaluate the whole herd. So how many horses are in the herd, their sex and age distribution, the interactions between the different individual horses, behaviors that the whole herd are showing. But we're limited by the habitats in which we can do direct observations in, and so this can bias data collection if we're trying to evaluate welfare of populations of animals, if we're only looking at animals that we can directly see. So some of the camera trap images are in the middle of the slide here, and you can see that they're giving different information, much more close-up information, and capturing horses that may be in habitats that we can't actually direct. And here's some examples of sort of measurable behavioral indicators of negative mental experiences. So I mentioned body posture being a really important one. You can see these horses here, they've really got their, we call this head lower than withers posture, which has been documented to be an indicator of lethargy, general discomfort or malaise, and often combined with changes in ear position and facial expression, which we can see in the horse on the left and the right. And the horse in the middle, you can see, is extremely emaciated, so a very poor body condition. And this horse had really reduced vigilance and reduced movement as well, all as a result of these horses here on the left. We've got horses that are fleeing from human disturbance, and they've got particular facial expression features that are seen with fear and anxiety in horses. The bottom right here, we've got a horse that's got a really severe lower limb injury, so that's going to be causing significant pain, and then also knock-on effects because he can't keep up with the herd. He's not going to be able to access food and water and social interaction. And here's some examples of behavioural indicators of positive mental experiences. So here we've got two horses close together, resting after a period of grazing, which is known to be associated with postprandial satiety. And here we've got horses enjoying pleasures of immersing themselves in cool water during hot weather, and above standing in the shade in hot weather. And on the slide here, we've got a young bachelor stallion that's really showing curiosity. We've got at the bottom there a range of close affiliative social interactions. And in the group photo, we've got a range of positive behavioural indicators here, showing the horse's agency and foraging, ability to choose where they're grazing, what they're grazing, or when they want to graze, when they want to rest. We got horses that are standing resting, horses that are lying resting, horses that are mutually grooming each other. So within that one herd, lots of positive. So the stage 7 in the protocol is applying a process of scientific validation to the indicators that can be measured. We've already mentioned how the mental experiences of an animal that represents its welfare state is subjective, and we can't measure that directly. So we're inferring what their mental experiences are likely to be, but this comes from validated knowledge from fields of physiology, neuroscience, ethology, behavioral sciences, and so on. And so what we do is we need to validate the links between measurable indicators and the mental experiences that they likely to reflect. Again, there's not time to really go through this validation process today, but I've done that in this publication on mental experiences in wild animals. And again, I've hopefully done that in a way to illustrate the steps using horses as an example, but in a way that those steps can be applied to. And then finally, stages 8 to 10 are about choosing the parameters that will go into the 5 domains model, with a grading scheme for grading welfare, compromise and enhancement in each domain, and assigning a confidence score to those grades, and then separately grading welfare alerting indicators to grade future welfare risk within each domain. Again, there's just not time to go through that today, but again, there will be more publications coming out from my PhD work that specifically address those stages, and again, currently that is available within my thesis for anyone that does want more information about that. There is brief descriptions of that in the 10-stage protocol paper, so that's a good starting point, as well as previous publications on the 5 domains model, but it's specifically dealt with in relation to wild horses within my thesis and in upcoming. So thanks very much. I hope that was a useful general overview. And again, I'm sorry to not be there live today to answer any questions, but I'm very happy if anybody does have questions to email me, and this is my email address. Thanks very much.